Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We're really excited that you can join us. And this is a conversation I'm super excited to host here at Sustainable Ag and Food System Funders. It's actually a session that we held at the SAFSF Forum this summer in New Mexico. It was on the last day of the conference. Speaking for myself, I was so fried and so tired. And yet I got so much energy from this conversation. The speakers that you're going to hear today, Zach, Lauren, Linda Jo, just really inspired me with this conversation. And the timing of this topic couldn't be better because tomorrow SAFSF launches our new integrated capital community of practice program. Oh, there I am. Okay. Hi, everybody. And so it just feels very aligned to continue these conversations about how we expand the capital toolbox in philanthropy to address systemic challenges that producers face, that communities face, just recognizing that we need all the capital tools available to us to create systems change. And so much of how we receive food and support food systems change is interacting with the market economy, and that gets into sectors and spaces that some of us in philanthropy don't interact with a lot, the lending space, the investment space. So this conversation is designed to weave together these different types of sectors and capital tools, and just really grateful for our speakers for being willing to press play on this session again. I will say that we're recording the session today, and we will be sharing the recording and also takeaways from the conversation. We want this to be conversational, so don't be shy about putting your comments or questions in the chat so that the speakers can respond to that. We also will have a dedicated time for questions and answers where you could come off mute, and we'll have sort of a facilitated conversation at that point. So I think that covers all of the housekeeping items that I was meant to cover. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Linda Jo Doctor from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Yep, you're off mute. You're good.
I'm mute. Okay, good, great, great. Thank you, everybody. So I'm coming from this little booth in the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in Battle Creek, Michigan. And it's great to see so many friends and colleagues on the call. And I'm very excited about this opportunity. I have to tell you that it's been an extraordinary pleasure working both with Lauren and Zach, who are both just extraordinary leaders in this field. And, as I've worked with some of you on this that are here on the call, that I can still consider myself a student in this arena of integrated capital. And I'm always excited about potential innovation, which I think we're going to hear about later on today, but it's just an extraordinary opportunity. So my role primarily, I'm going to do the setup and then primarily moderate. And the majority of the time, we'll have the opportunity to really be in conversation with Lauren and Zach. And after my opening comments, they'll introduce themselves and then we'll do some setting of the table. So, and just the opening comments, just to share that despite the evidence to the contrary, regenerative farmers and ranchers are often labeled as too risky. And I would say also those along the supply chain by conventional lenders, not because of their actual performance, but because they fall outside the structures that define credit worthiness in industrial agriculture. And while we're using the term regenerative agriculture, some of us use more sustainable agriculture, some of us agroecology. So some of us natural farming. So this is the arena of the work, but we're probably using the term regenerative agriculture during the course of our conversations. That's a whole nother conversation vis-a-vis differences in the same, but in here we're really looking about, the solid work. So this panel will reframe the conversation around risk. What is real risk in agriculture lending? And what's just a byproduct of broken financial systems? We'll explore how regenerative farmers and ranchers lack of access to debt or any other capital as holding back a more resilient food system, as well as the emergence of more innovative, mission-driven lenders. Some of you are on this call, and investors, sometimes called the alternative financing mechanisms, and who are returning to more relationship and opportunity-based models that enable putting soil health also on the balance sheet, but as a main piece. We'll also highlight loan guarantees, and this is the piece that's really exciting for opportunity for philanthropy to play in specifically to agriculture and local regional food systems. One of the most powerful tools of unlocking credit where traditional underwriting falls short. Because regenerative producers often operate without subsidies, crop insurance, or conventional benchmarks, lenders have fewer ways to assess risk. Guarantees help close that gap, giving lenders a backstop and making it possible to finance operations that are sound, but many times structurally included. So I just want to now have a very, very brief moment for Lauren and Zach to introduce themselves. So I'll go off, and Lauren, you maybe want to go first, and then Zach.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Such a privilege to be here today. Thank you to SAFSF for giving us not one, but two opportunities to really discuss the importance of revolutionizing access to credit for the men and women who are really trying to revolutionize our food system. I started out in litigation. I was a civil trial lawyer that sued pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies for making people sick. And I quickly realized that I was on the wrong side of that system. I was on the back end where I couldn't quite do anything to fix the system that allowed companies to make people sick. So I got very interested in the food system and how our diet and access to nutrition really plays a role in keeping people healthy. Got a master's of food and ag law and policy at the University of Arkansas, started working in the wonderful world of venture capital, looking at incredible technologies for agriculture and food production, and really had a deep dive into this entire sector through that technology and investing lens. I'd also started apprenticing in a grass-fed beef operation. I figured if I was going to go into private practice or represent attorneys or work on ag and food issues, I should probably spend some time with those folks and get to know what their day-to-day is like. Long story short, I loved it so much. I ended up staying in Arkansas. I continued my apprenticeship and eventually bought my own farm thanks to the USDA Beginning Farmer and Rancher program. So shout out USDA for offering that. And raised grass-fed beef, lamb, goat, and sold it direct to consumers in Northwest Arkansas for almost a decade. I had a lot of really interesting experiences as a first-generation producer trying to access capital, and you'll hear me share more of those anecdotes as we continue into this discussion to really unpack why is it so hard for unconventional producers to obtain even a simple operating line of credit or buy a farm. Eventually, COVID really destroyed our access to small scale processing. Unfortunately, everyone who raised cattle wanted to get into that direct market segment. So our processors were booked up for as much as 2 years, made the difficult decision to sell the farm. And also looked briefly with my producer friends at trying to finance our own processing plant, which was another front row seat into how difficult it can be for producers who already have full-time jobs farming, and in our case, also processing, distributing, marketing, engaging with consumers, how hard it can be for producers to take on that gauntlet of putting together their own multi-million-dollar financing for a processing plant. So all the work I do now is really informed by my own experiences as a first-generation regenerative producer trying to access capital in this space. And I'm just very honored once again to be able to share that experience with you and to talk a little bit about the work FS6 is doing to change the game for access to capital. I'll pass it on to Zach.
Yeah, yeah, great. Go for it.
All right. Good to see you all. Good to be here. Thanks to SAFSF for inviting us to come back and revisit this conversation. The times have changed a little bit, but I think we're still facing a lot of the same issues that we realized back in the spring in New Mexico. I'm Zach Ducheneau. I am currently working to develop a company that can innovate in the space of finance for all producers, not just regenerative producers. But the goal is to think about how do we get producers into a regenerative mindset, because that's the first step of taking a foray into regenerative agriculture. Prior to this, I was your farm service agency administrator for President Biden. Prior to that, I was the executive director at the Intertribal Agriculture Council. But my origin story dates back to the 80s, growing up a child of the farm financial crisis and seeing firsthand what really terrible policy and pressures can do to a farm family or ranch family. We ended up losing the family cattle herd during those times and lost the means of production for a few years, which resulted in us eventually losing some of our land holdings because of stoicism and good fortune and a genetic predisposition towards hard-headedness. We were able to persevere and keep the place together. So I had the opportunity to be the third generation to manage that beef cattle and quarter horse operation. And it's now handed off to the fourth generation who are doing really great things in the regenerative space. It's important to note that we knew of regenerative things way back then. I can remember harken back to a time when I saw a dilapidated hot wire fence in our far northwest pasture where we were trying to move towards a more holistic system of grazing. It didn't work out because we just didn't have the resources. We're still here trying to resolve that 50 years later. How do we get resources to producers to adopt these practices that a growing body of evidence is demonstrating is a better way to do it? I look forward to the conversation. Welcome questions, welcome dialogue. Hopefully we can have a good visit and continue this important work beyond this particular panel and into the next few years and fundamentally change this.
Thanks, Zach. So Lauren and Zach, can you do a little bit of setting the table, like these terms, perceived risk, bankability gap, why are borrows considered risky? And then maybe Zach, if you're willing to go into a little bit more about what was it like living through the farm crisis 50 years ago, and having some sort of like some historical grounding on from that time to now. So that would be very helpful, because that also helps us understand why are we in the situation that we're in. So Lauren, if you start and then Zach follow.
Yeah, thank you, Linda Jo. So I'd like to just start us off with an anecdote, an experience I had as a first generation producer, once again, trying to buy my first farm. I had 3 wonderful years of farming experience and had an opportunity to expand our small ruminant herd, our sheep and our goats, primarily the goats. And I already had all these receipts and all this data showing how well the business was doing, showing the demand that we had, and showing the prices that we were getting for either retail or wholesale for all the wonderful regeneratively raised proteins that we were selling. So me being naive and perhaps a little bold, walked into Farm Credit and walked into the Farm Service Agency. I had a property picked out that was a perfect fit for expanding a goat operation. And I brought all this data in my business plan and I said, hello, I'd like to buy this farm. You know, what paperwork do I fill out? How do I apply for this process? Here's my business plan. And they started digging into everything, handed me a huge stack of paper and said, by the way, we really appreciate that you brought this data about your existing business, but we have to use commodity prices when we look at your business plan. So even if you can prove that you were getting $10, $12, $13, $14, $15 a pound for things like grass-fed beef or selling live animals, we use these USDA maintained benchmark schedules. That really blew the lid off of my entire plan. And because of that huge gap in pricing, my farm didn't appear to cash flow using those commodity prices. And I was denied on the original farm I wanted to buy and lost the opportunity to buy that piece of land and the opportunity to expand the regenerative business that we had. I went through several more properties before we finally found one that everyone could agree on and that the numbers looked okay on. And to be perfectly honest with you, primarily the cash flow that they were looking at to see if I could pay my monthly mortgage was my off-farm income. They weren't necessarily as interested in looking at the regenerative business, even though the prices were great. We were making really great money. So it was really my off-farm income that they saw as the source of debt service for that. fortunately was able to buy that farm and got on the land and had a wonderful time working with Farm Credit and working with FSA once they got over that initial hurdle of what even is regenerative agriculture. And I think that's a big piece of the equation that some of us don't always take into account. A lot of farmers and ranchers are not working or living or operating in these spaces where people are seeing the word regeneration in grocery stores, or they're hearing it spoken about in their day-to-day conversations. And so when I walked into that FSA office, they had no idea what I was talking about. They didn't understand rotational grazing. They even kind of gave me grief for not having black cattle. I had red cows because they were a more heat tolerant breed that did well on just forage instead of grain diet. And there was really a lot of cultural opposition I ran into walking into those offices saying, I want to buy a farm to do this thing that you all aren't familiar with. And I really had to convince them and wear them down over time and explain to them why we used hot wire fencing, why we rotated our cattle, why we calved in certain seasons that they didn't calve in. So that's something that I really try and impress upon folks is we're not simply asking producers to make different business management decisions or different financial decisions. We're also asking them to potentially do something provocative in their communities or really raise some eyebrows from their neighbors. And it takes a bit of gumption to really stick to your guns on that and say, even if everyone around me thinks this is crazy or doesn't understand it or doesn't care to understand it, I'm still going to advocate for myself and try and obtain this financing, get on this land, and then prove to them all why what I'm doing is worth understanding. So that's just a brief example of how this credit system by default expects the people who walk into the doors to be raising some kind of commodity in a very typical industrialized commodity system. And when you walk into some of these lending offices, not all, but many of them, it is incumbent upon you to convince them that what you're doing is a good idea. If you're not aligning with conventional standards or raising conventional commodities, you have to really hope that your lender is curious enough to maybe Google a few things, read an article or two, or hear your stories about what you're doing and why it's different. Because honestly, for a lot of these lenders, different can mean scary. And we're going to talk more throughout this discussion on how different in this case certainly does not mean scary, and how a lot of the work that folks like Zach and I are doing is meant to dispel that myth and show that the unknown isn't necessarily scary. It just means we need to help our lenders and our banking institutions learn a few more things about different ways to farm and ranch.
Thank you, Zach.
Are entities that benefit from producers are producer is not risky. If the case, yes, it would have a loan.
Hey, Zach,
Let alone one that performs the way it does. Yes.
you're breaking up a little bit. I just wonder if you might want to go off camera to see if that might help with the bandwidth again.
Let me see if that's any better. We're cruising around in the hills around Santa Barbara, California here. So is this the bad spot? All right, so let's try that, see if that works any better. Maggie, why don't you go ahead and go on without me and let me get set up here.
Okay. And then when Zach comes back on, I know he wanted to, one of the things he was going to do is also give us some context about how we've ended up in the crisis. I don't know, Lauren, do you want to take that on, or should we wait for Zach to come back?
I think we should wait for Zach to touch on the 1980s and the context there about how that really informed. Yeah, he lived through it. I didn't, so I certainly would be a less
excellent. So why don't we then, start to look at because I know you started to share with us some of your own personal experience as a first generation beef producer, but how does a producer look at debt as an asset class? And what role do you say that debt capital plays in an average producer's operation?
Yeah, I love this question. A lot of people ask what I'm working on these days. And when I say really honestly, nothing but financing, people say, well, what does that have to do with food system change? Why is financing worth spending all your time on? And to be perfectly honest, access to credit is the lifeblood of a producer's operation. Even if I want to adopt a new practice, if I don't have some source of cash flow or funding to pay for a new piece of equipment, going to take a class, buying a new input, testing out a new market, trying to do independent marketing, coming up with my own label, all of that requires capital investment. And something that I encourage us all to think about is transitioning to different types of agriculture costs money. And essentially, when we ask producers to transition out of certain practices into different ones, that always comes with an implicit ask to spend money. We are asking them to invest and spend money in a new practice, a new market, what have you. So the first source of capital for a lot of producers, if it isn't off-farm income from an off-farm job, is their operating or production line of credit. And when I go into the farm credit office or whoever my banker might be, and I want to talk to them about getting an additional increase to my line of credit or tell them what I plan to do with it, if my lender doesn't really like what they're hearing, if they don't think I should try and start experimenting with 100% grass-fed beef, or that I shouldn't diversify from row crops into livestock, they have the power to deny my line of credit or to put limitations on it. So that's why talking about access to capital, specifically this credit opportunity, is so critical, because it really can put a lot of gas in the tank for producers to have the capital they need to try new things and to make different choices in their operation. If they have a really lean year, and so many producers, y'all, right now are really struggling, this is regenerative, conventional across the board. When money is really tight, they aren't necessarily thinking about innovation and new practices. They're thinking about, I sure hope I can pay back the current loan I have so that I can get a new one and make it into next year. So it's really important for all of us to be realizing how much access to capital is a focal point for producers in their operation. I'm going to pause here and see if Zach's landed in a good spot to chime in, and we can jump back, Zach, and talk a little bit about the 1980s farm financial crisis and how that's really informed the way lenders approach credit today. Zach, are you with us?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Kick me out if I'm not. I think I'm in a good spot where I've got at least voice.
You sound
But
great.
I want to talk about, okay, let's talk about ag finance, especially in the federal sector. You know, in the 30s, we had a reality where we had clouds of dust blowing over to Washington, D.C. that spurred the federal government into action to try to do something different about preserving the climate. Ironically, we're here again 90 years later, a lot of the same circumstances pervading. But out of the 1930s, the Farm Credit System was created. Then it was the Federal Land Bank and the Production Credit Associations, and they were created to fill a role that conventional lending wouldn't fill. They were created to come in there and help provide capital where it was perceived to be risky. Perceived to be risky is what I want to drive the point home here today, because ag finance, when done at terms that meet the needs of the producer, is risky. As the FSA administrator, I had a chance to really parse the portfolio and understand the data there. And while serving in large part as the lender of last resort, FSA's portfolio really performed as well as any commercial lender did. And the magic sauce wasn't the fact that we have a low institutional rate of return on our capital. It's the flexibility that we offer. And I think that's going to be key as we go forward into any ag economy that we're going to have to preserve rural America or to promote regenerative practices as a means to help improve our climate and our environment. We're going to have to acknowledge that we're going to have to be flexible in our terms and give producers the same opportunity that we in the funding realm enjoy around flexibility and affordability. So the 1980s, we had a circumstance where the farm credit system had evolved or devolved into a place where they started to take a more risk averse approach, and conventional capital still wasn't in this space. So we had that on top of trade wars, on top of escalating interest rates, and then
Oh, bummer. Looks like we lost him.
Yep, we lost him just when he was going to go for it. And the policy changed. And we
I
had,
think I'm here.
great.
So, we got to the 80s, and the problem that we faced in the 80s was there was a federal policy shift, to Linda's point, and it went towards clearing up delinquency, not with flexibility, not with compassion, not with empathy, not with forward thinking, but by taking out delinquent borrowers. We had the opportunity in our administration to do things quite a little differently to stave off what I think is the farm financial crisis of the 20s that we're in right now. We had first ARPA that was then turned into the Inflation Reduction Act that allowed us to stave this for a few years by helping those producers in our direct and our guaranteed loan portfolio navigate through some financial uncertainty and get to now. But we've seen the administration change, and we're seeing different ag policy start to percolate to the surface again, where we've got a lot of producers that are in the throes of another farm financial crisis, wondering how they're going to get through next year. And a lot of our folks in agriculture are at a precipice where we could come in with institutional capital, the likes of which we could muster from this room, to fundamentally change the flow of capital in these communities and redefine what risk is. Because ultimately, risk is in ag production, it's not in ag finance. And the terms of finance can either exacerbate that risk, as they do with a short-term perspective, where producers never amass working capital and where they're left victim to the current system, or they can mitigate the risk that exists in agriculture and promote prosperity for our producers. And I hope that's the conversation that we start to get into through this panel and beyond.
Yes, and we're going to start to move, because here we are at 50 years of consolidation, industrialization, and here we are today. So in policy supporting that. So let me ask, you Zach, you mentioned risk. So why is it that we hear so often that regenerative agriculture is less risky than conventional agriculture? And if that is true, then why do so many regenerative borrowers struggle to find debt capital? And I know from comments from Jeremy, this is something that's not just a USA issue. This is a global issue, and particularly in the South, because Jeremy, having worked in Latin America. So why then do so many regen borrowers struggle to find the debt capital that aligns with their operations goals and attributes?
Really good question, Linda. And I think we have to boil down what happens when the lenders are allowed to define risk in a relationship. When lenders can convince a borrower that their operation is risky or there's uncertainty, they can charge more for it. So it's more profitable. There's not necessarily any incentive for a lender to extend capital to a regen borrower that they know is engaging in less risky practices, because if they acknowledge that there's less risk in that relationship, they're then acknowledging that they should charge less for the capital, and that's not contributing to the bottom line of their lending entity. I was at a conference in Chicago where we were talking about the beef complex and talking about how do we help the lending industry understand the resilience and the inherently lower risk of regenerative grazing practices. And I said, why would we want to help them? We need to help producers with that information, help them come to the table with that information, because if we give it to lenders directly or insurance companies directly, part of their business model is to convince someone else to bear whatever risk there is there. So we need to really be thinking about this from the perspective of bringing new capital in that acknowledges the value of these practices and acknowledges the value of getting producers into that regenerative frame of mind that Lauren started out in, so that we can get to something that's going to be better and different. But we can't expect existing capital structures to do that, because it's going to cut into their bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to add on some of that too, in terms of the experiences that I had. And We don't, I think, talk often enough about the federal farm safety net programs. And that includes things like subsidies, crop insurance, subsidizing the premium payments for crop insurance access, and even things like historical benchmark data that the USDA maintains. And that could be historical yield averages for a specific county, historical prices, estimated future prices. It's really powerful how much those federal farm safety net programs act essentially as a credit enhancement and a de-risking component of this conventional ag system and the conventional finance system that's grown up around it. So if you're a producer that's not growing a traditional commodity that really fits these nice check boxes of I have access to a subsidy, I'm eligible for crop insurance, you can look up data, not just about what I'm growing, but about yields in the specific county that I'm growing it in. If you don't have access to that federal farm safety net, a lender is going to have a lot more questions about you. They're not going to be able to easily look at your access to subsidies and crop insurance as a form of debt service coverage. They're not going to say, well, even if her crop doesn't go well, we know she's going to get a subsidy. We know she has crop insurance. There's at least some source of repayment. So a lot of what we're thinking about at Food System 6 today is it really less risky when conventional agriculture benefits from this tens of billions of dollar taxpayer funded safety net? And what would happen if we could start offering regenerative producers equal access to some of those safety net protections that inherently de-risk conventional agriculture? So that's a lot of how we think about it, is until there's equal access to a lot of these credit enhancements, or until we figure out better ways to help regenerative producers manage the inherent risks of a business that relies on good weather, consistent rain, and stable markets, until we can help them navigate those bumps that inevitably come down the road, what are we really offering producers? Are we offering them a viable, long-term, stable enterprise, or are we essentially saying to them right now, you have to farm differently, and by the way, you're going to lose everything if you have a bad year? So in terms of whether regenerative agriculture is less risky, I mean, it really depends on what kinds of access to credit enhancements that producer can get, and how a lender might view access to those credit enhancements. I see Zach's got his hand up.
Yeah, Lauren, I just wanted to riff on that just a little bit before we get to the next point, because this is critical. If we improve the terms of finance that are offered to all producers, so that you can function and perform and prosper and have profit using those commodity level prices, all of the profitability of your enhanced value added or regenerative practices can be reinvested in your business. So fundamental to all of this is we've got to improve terms of finance for everybody. So when they do take that step from their own production income to get into that more regenerative or that more value added ag space, the profitability stays with the producer instead of getting gobbled back up by the investor or by the financer.
Great. Okay, so we're moving, and it's in some ways just one other piece of the landscape. If we go beyond the conventional debt landscape, are you seeing any innovation in alternative financing models for producers? And then, where yes, what limitations are those entities facing? And I know some of you are on this call, so you might want to pop in on this one, either your comments or your questions. So, and then we're going to move to some, what are some other ways of doing things and moving the envelope. But let's first take a look at just the current landscape. We are seeing some alternative financing options that are emerging. And what are you seeing vis-a-vis patterns? And then what kind of limitations are the entities facing?
Linda, I'll start here and then hand it off to Lauren. But I see a lot of those folks that are really pushing the envelope here in the room with us. We've got Dirt Capital, our friends at Mad Ag, Lauren, and the work they're doing at Food System 6. They're at the front edge of this work, but they're victim to the same thing that's keeping producers in this commodity framework. Short-term perspective by lenders and investors. And what we really need to do is start to have a conversation with philanthropy, with institutional investors, where we transcend or bridge across into the endowment side and get out of the charitable work side of this relationship. Because if we can get into the investment side of philanthropy, we're talking about 95% of the value instead of 5% of the value. And then we can offer a real alternative to some of the things that philanthropies might be invested in that they don't necessarily want. Take US Treasuries, for example, today. If you're in US Treasuries with part of your philanthropic endowment, you're financing ICE raids just up the road here in Los Angeles. So we can propose this to that other side if we can get the longer term perspective of investment engaged in this. But I've talked with our friends at Dirt Tap and Mad Ag, and they're suffering from that same thing. The first conversation that we get into when we talk with investors about doing something different, what's my exit strategy and where's the data? Well, you are never going to have data to prove something that's never been done before. So we need to start there and then start to think about what's the data that you need to prove that what we're doing isn't working, isn't having those outcomes, because we can provide reams and reams of that. We can provide generations and generations of that. So we've got some great folks in here that are pushing the boundaries, but we need to help push institutional investors towards them.
So before we get into ways to do that, Lauren, and just any comments on your part?
Oh, yes, definitely. Really appreciate everything Zach had to say there. And I have had the privilege over the last 18 to 2 months of talking to over 30 or 40 innovative lending institutions that have said status quo simply won't do. We want to reimagine how we can extend credit to food and farm businesses, farmers and ranchers who are really trying to rethink how we feed ourselves and how we go about this business of agriculture. And their work is incredibly inspiring. The commitment that some of these lenders have to relationship-based lending, to actually understanding what their borrowers are doing, why they're doing it, what are they growing, what are their future aspirations, what do they need to really take their business to the next level. It is incredibly emboldening, and it makes the work we're doing at FS6 just really, truly easier to do, because we know that we're catalyzing a movement that's going to bring us back to the type of lending that honestly is really the only type of lending that fits the food system, where it's relationship based. And I like to tell people to think of it this way. Current lending in the ag system, they really are a capital provider. Here's your loan, here's the terms, take it or leave it. We have most of the bargaining power. The way that these innovative lenders are operating, they're capital partners. They are a partner with that producer, with that borrower. They want to know what's happening in that operation, how they can support it, how they can facilitate growth. It's not simply about making more money for that lending institution. And as we think about our work at FS6, how do we reimagine this safety net? What could we really do to help the innovative lenders do more of what they're already doing? Loan guarantees is one of the first things that came to mind for us. And a lot of these really wonderful, innovative lenders, because they are not set up like traditional banking entities, they are excluded from accessing those FSA loan guarantees. And FSA offers loan guarantees up to 95%. It can be extremely beneficial in terms of getting a deal done, knowing that there's that kind of backstop behind it. So one of the first things that a lot of these lenders said to us was, loan guarantee access could really change the game for our lending. It could allow me to be even more flexible. It could allow me to work with borrowers who are maybe first generation. They've only got 1 or 2 years of production history. They're branching into a new market. They're really trying to level up their business. So yes, we are seeing an incredible amount of innovation, but what I'd impress upon all of us is that these innovative lenders are operating without the benefit of the same financial infrastructure that supports large conventional ag institutions. And the more we can all do to make their lives easier, to elevate their work, and to provide some of that infrastructure, whether it be some of the benchmark data that Zach was referencing, everything we can do to power their lending would be incredibly beneficial for producers.
Thank you. And you're sort of moving us into the next step, but there is a question, and I'll put it out there, and because it could help in the understanding that, can you provide a little more clarity on the timeline required to transition to regen ag practices? I mean, that is something that's happening now in the field. And what are the typical use of cash? What's the capital? How's it being used? Because apparently both of you mentioned some, so that actually adds to the need of capital in order to support that process. So if somebody wants to address that,
Sure,
or we can.
I
Okay,
can
go
start,
for
and
it.
Lauren can come in because she's actually done it. I think the first thing that we need to do with respect to the timeline is understand that we've got to not only provide producers with the education that they need to take advantage of these opportunities, we've got to provide them with the resources they need in order to operationalize that knowledge. The knowledge exists almost everywhere now. You can Google it and find how to develop your regenerative grazing system. You can even find a way to build the fences and make your own hot wire fence, or do a diversified cover crop. All of that exists in the public sector now, but producers don't have the capital to take that step.
Yeah.
And until we build a system of finance that helps them where they're at, we're going to continue to wonder why this doesn't scale. And I got a pollinator flying around my phone right now. So as we think about the reality, the information's there. It's not that producers would do it if they knew how. It's if they had the resource, they would. Lauren's been down that road. She has overcome that with the FSA, getting them to acknowledge the value of it. So Lauren, I'll kick it over to you to share a little bit more about that timeline that you got on to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. And before I dive into my experience too, regeneration, I think a lot of us come from the space of, how do we know when it's finally fully regenerative? How do we know when we've arrived? And my experience working on many different landscapes over those 8 to 10 years that I raised ruminants, regeneration is a practice. It's an art. It's not something where I walk out to my farm one day and say, yes, we're finally regenerative. We've done it. Seasons change, weather changes, animals change, everything is constantly changing. And I think the ethos of regeneration isn't this static destination we're all trying to arrive at. It's a mindset, exactly how Zach is saying. When can I reinvest in my operation? How do I make sure that I'm not extracting more than the land has to offer? How can I reduce my reliance on external inputs? How can I upcycle waste products on my farm? How can I better work with my neighbors who raise different species or crops with me? Regeneration is a practice. And so I think people trying to find the timeline on when do I know I finally achieved regeneration, I think that's going to be a frustrating effort. Especially as our climate continues to change so volatile, we're going to have to face new meteorological challenges every single season. And I mean, I saw that even in my corner of Arkansas over the 10 years I farmed, the storms in the springtime got increasingly more violent and devastating, to the point where I actually changed when I planned to have baby goats and baby sheep because of how bad the weather got during the period that I typically was planning to lamb or to kid. In terms of how producers actually go about adopting regeneration, I think we have a tendency to scare a lot of them by dumping too much on their lap at one time. And as Zach alluded to, most producers across the board are barely breaking even, and many of them are in the red. I saw a statistic a month or two ago saying the average farm family is going to make a negative $328 this year. Which really begs the question, how do we expect people to pay for these new practices? And when we say, pay for new practices, make investments in the operation, that could look like a lot of different things. And what's regenerative, or what's the first step towards regeneration in Northwest Arkansas, is not necessarily the same as the Pacific Northwest or New England. So we really always have to take a place-based lens to, what landscape are we trying to regenerate or achieve more regeneration on? A lot of times it can look like access to workshops, materials, clinics, webinars, informational sessions, producer networks. When I started doing rotational grazing, I joined a local grazing group called Grassroots Grazing Group, which was a bunch of, I will say, seasoned and more experienced farmers who'd been around for a long time and had been doing rotational grazing before regeneration was even the buzzword. And having access to that community of practice as a grazer is really what helps me figure out how to take my highly depleted, overgrazed, brand new farm I got and nurture it and get it back to the point where it could sustain an appropriate number of livestock and be a productive operation. So it really, I think we have to ask the producer, if you wanted to try a new market or adopt a new practice, what do you think is the first investment you'd want to make? And I sometimes just think we all stray too easily into that paternalistic space of telling operators and producers what they ought to be doing instead of treating them truly like the experts they are on not only agriculture, but on their specific farm and what they've been doing for some of them since the day they were born on that very piece of land.
So before we go on and really get into two innovations that we're really interested in sharing about, are there any other specific questions that for Zach and Lauren, just around the base setting and context, and as we're moving forward? Let's just see here from Jamie. Okay, this is are others seeing better collaboration between lenders and state or federal grantors to support farmers in financing? So in the Midwest, we've had a lot of momentum with lenders willing to offer these terms, financing options. So this was a question about if are others seeing that. So maybe people can respond in the text, in chat. Are you hearing that from, I know, Lauren, the kind of work you're doing and looking at some of the other innovative lenders that you're working with?
You know, it's, to be candid, and I think a lot of us feel this way, it's hard to really know what's going to be business as usual with a lot of the federal grant programs. And I've heard a lot of different, anecdotes and stories from lenders trying to offer bridge financing, trying to fill that gap. I think there's a very interesting research project to be done maybe in the future about what really happened with this chaos that none of us could really ever have anticipated, what really was the true fallout or cost of it. But I've heard mixed stories on the success of folks being able to engage with federal funding resources, obviously. And then I have heard a lot of people saying that we should start focusing more efforts on state sources of public funding to try and fill some of those gaps.
So I want to, Olivia, I see your question, and I actually want to hold it for now and want to have Lauren and Zach share a bit about two really great innovations. And then we can, the question that's come forward, just so that Lauren and Zach, you have it in the background that we can go to it. Could you speak a little bit more about what's missing, the concerns about the data availability and utility? So I want to get to that, but I want to create the space to really have the two of you share about some of the innovations. Okay, and then there's some other questions about data, which we will get to. Okay, so and what's really going to push the envelope? And Zach, if you can share a bit about the fifth C overview, provide an overview, and then Lauren, about loan guarantees, a philanthropic supported loan guarantee effort. And let's put those out there so people can be familiar with them, and then we'll get to these data questions.
You bet. I'll go ahead and start. So what I'm doing at Fifth Z is basically trying to provide a proof of concept that folks with long-term needs from their pool of capital can realize a market rate return by partnering with a producer as an investor. And the approach that I'm taking can best be explained by how I put my money where my mouth is, because I knew I was going to be out in this sector trying to raise capital to do this and trying to convince folks to do it with their money, and have found some very valuable partners in that, in the 11th Hour Project and Kat Taylor and World Within, who believe in this concept and are helping me fund the proof of concept. But I put my own money in this first, and I invested $30,000 with a young lady who's doing regenerative grass-fed beef on our operation. And her total cost of capital is $3,000 a year, as long as she keeps my $30,000. So basically, it's a 10% interest-only loan where she can pay the principal back at her pace and at her time frame, which leaves her capital to grow her operation and deepen her operation and diversify her operation, and maybe even set aside a little money to build a working capital reserve or a land acquisition reserve. She came to me immediately after we struck this deal and said, what if I have a good year next year and I want to pay you back? And I said, well, let's talk about that, because if you, after you pay me the $3,000 for the use of my money this year, want to pay me an additional $5,000 to pay down on what you owe me, that's only going to save you $500 over the next year. Surely you can find something to do with that $5,000 that will make us $501, because that's all you need to do. So we're treating it like an investment where we both have a shared growth incentive in this. Hers is, if she reinvests in her business, the $3,000 that she owes me becomes a diminishing return on her asset base. Mine is, I've got my money outperforming and I don't need to underwrite it again. And I can take the money that she pays me and roll it out to another producer, so that after 10 years, I'll have about $120,000 out there performing, providing me an annuity in a bunch of young, small producers who are trying to get into agriculture. So that's the model that we're trying to advance. And what we hope to do is demonstrate that philanthropies that have a perpetual mission, who are looking for a CPI +5 return on that endowment, can take a look at this and say, that looks a lot like a market rate investment, not a program related investment. Let's get into a conversation with our investment committee and talk through this a little bit. So that's the innovation that I'm trying to promote. And I have a good opportunity to work with our friends at Food System 6 on theirs. So I'll kick it over to Lauren to talk about that.
Thank you, Zach. So about 2 years ago, Mark Watson from Pot Liquor Capital, we were chatting at a meeting, I think it was in DC or Minneapolis somewhere, and we got to talking about what's limiting you from doing more at Pot Liquor. What are some of the challenges you're really experiencing, and what kind of work could be done to help extend your lending even further? And before I even finished talking, loan guarantees was one of the first things that Mark mentioned. And loan guarantees are a wonderful tool. They've been around in finance forever. And for those on the call, maybe slightly unfamiliar, a loan guarantee is essentially a promise to pay a portion or all of the loan if the borrower defaults. And to refresh again on something I mentioned earlier, the Farm Service Agency offers up to 95% loan guarantees for farmland loans, which is a really incredible credit enhancement. A lender only has 5% skin in the game if they get that 95% guarantee, so they know their investment is pretty safe. And I worked with Zach when he was still at FSA, and we took a deep look at all those regulations, how the guarantee program was set up, and what opportunities we might have had to start creating a sandbox or an opportunity to see if the USDA would be amenable to opening up some of those loan guarantees and experimenting on extending them to these mission-driven, innovative, non-bank lenders. Unfortunately, ran out of time. The administration changed over, but we already had gotten so much positive feedback from the lending community about the importance of this tool and how much demand there was for it, that we decided we would just go ahead and launch a private philanthropically supported pilot to demonstrate, well, what does it actually look like to make guarantees to these folks? Very much in the spirit of Zach saying, put your money where your mouth is. We didn't want to just talk about the promise of loan guarantees. We decided that we need to actually prove it with data. So we offer loan guarantees to these innovative mission-driven lenders, and it's meant to really help expand their ability to offer flexible financing. Many of these lenders have told us that the ability to tell potential investors in their loan funds that they have access to something like a loan guarantee can really incentivize even more private capital to come into those loan funds. And then in the realm of possibility, a really exciting opportunity down the road for us is secondary market facilitation. How could we take some of these guaranteed loans, sell them to institutional buyers, and allow those loan funds to have that capital back so they can make even more loans to regenerative producers, small scale producers, and folks who've been systemically excluded from the capital system? And we've talked a lot about data. And personally, as someone who suffered from the severe lack of data within the banking institutions, A core component of this program is to work with these innovative lenders and really study how they underwrite. What are they doing differently? What's working well for them? Is there some type of underwriting that works very well for a specific sector? Where have they had successes? How can we take all of their portfolio performance data about how their lending has gone and aggregate it and elevate it? In my conversations with potential guarantors, one of the first questions they ask is, what is the historical performance of this innovative lending sector? And then we get into a bit of a chicken and the egg where I say, make a guarantor commitment, give us capacity, and let us get that data for you. But so many of them have said, no, we want to see that data up front. We want to know what the risk profile is of this type of lending. So at FS6, we're undertaking a new report that we're hoping to produce our first iteration of next year called the Regenerative Ag Lending Report, where we can really take all of the good work and the data that these innovative lenders have amassed over several years now for some of them and create a central repository for it and really help produce it in different formats for different stakeholders, whether it be the private investment community, or ideally, in the case of what we're doing with our loan guarantee program, we want to knock on USDA's door eventually and say, hey, here's what it actually looks like to make loan guarantees into this space, and here's how they underwrite it. We want to make a new playbook for the conventional ag lending space and say, your traditional underwriting doesn't work here, but here's 7 examples of other grass-fed beef operations and how they received the line of credit and how it was structured. So even though Guarantees for Regenerative Agriculture is really focused on helping move more money today through these innovative loan funds, it's really meant to build the data that can change the culture of lending in the long term and get USDA to offer equitable access to these loan guarantees.
Very good. Lauren, I'm going to riff on that just a second, because one of the many places that I find myself where I probably shouldn't be is helping them with their guarantee program. And if we were simply trying to build another way to guarantee loans for our conventional lending sector, I would have said, hell no. There's no point in trying to entice them into doing something that they frankly don't want to when they have the tools to mitigate the risk themselves by changing the terms. So the fact that Lauren and Karen and the folks at Food System 6 are working in this unconventional lender space to provide guarantees to help them leverage their capital into this institutional market is really critical. There are plenty of guarantees available for commercial credit to be doing this. We shouldn't even be having this call if those guarantees were doing what they're supposed to be doing. Commercial lenders would be jumping into this space, but they've been allowed to profitize that. There are banks in the country that are devaluing the assets of producers so that the balance sheet ratios are skewed to create a higher interest rate so they can then get a 95% guarantee on that artificially propped up interest rate. We've got to convince the world that we've got to do these guarantees for these unconventional lenders so they can prove the way to do it right, improve the way to do it proper to the benefit of the producer, not just to de-risk the lender, as the current FSA guarantee often finds itself doing.
Thank you so much, Zach. I really appreciate it. And Zach has been instrumental from day one on this program, just helping us think through guarantees, advising us, and oftentimes providing a little morale boost that, yes, this is worth it, even on the hard days. So thank you very much, Zach. Appreciate that.
Yes, thank you to both of you. And I have to share in hearing about both of these options and also this pending report. I have to share that I'm very excited, and I see that there's some pathways here, some openings here. So thank you to the both of you. I want to, Sarah Bell, your question was right in line with, I think, what Lauren was saying. Did we miss something? And if yes, can you just get off, can you jump in and there's a missing piece there for your question because you asked something very similarly?
Yeah, no, I think Lauren covered it. Thank you.
And Olivia? The
Good
two
as
of you
well. Yeah. No, the answer was great. Thank you for that.
Excellent, excellent. So let's let's open it up at this point. Let's open it up as far as any questions. There's a lot that Zach and Lauren have shared with us, both the context, background, how we got to this situation, what are some opportunities that could move things forward. We've got some as part of the webinar, we've got some folks that are in this innovative lending space, as well as some funders. There's opportunities, mission-related investments, as well as the other investment components of the philanthropic foundations. Any questions that are emerging for you, any additional information that would be helpful for you. This is a unique opportunity to having somebody like Zach with his experiences and working in the public sector. And also, Zach didn't say, but being able to build out one of the first CDFIs in Indian country also. And then Lauren with the innovation that Food System 6 has been supporting, and now this new work. And I see a new question emerging. Maggie's going to also help me. Oh, wait a minute. I lost it. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so Lauren, there's a question. How much money are you trying to raise?
Yes, thank you, Dorothy. I
Great
love this
question.
So for our guarantor program, we have 750,000 in guarantor commitments. And what I love about this program is that it really allows a philanthropy to do something innovative. And when you make a guarantor commitment to our program, we don't necessarily need that capital. We accept guarantor commitments in the form of an unfunded pledge. So a philanthropy could use its endowment assets, a DAF holder can use its DAF, and it simply pledges however much its commitment is. It keeps those funds, keeps them invested, keeps earning interest on them. And when it's time to pay a guarantee call, that fund can come out of anywhere that guarantor chooses, and it's a 501c3 grant into our program. So yes, it's a grant program, but it's a grant program that really allows you to activate the endowment or your DAF, or if you're a high net worth individual, if you just have assets that you'd like to pledge, it allows you to put those to work while you're still earning interest on them. We have 750,000 so far, as I said, and we're really hoping to get to that $1 million mark by the end of the year. It would be an exciting place to stop for the year in its first year of this program. And as far as how much we want to raise, the demand we're seeing from lenders, is already so profound. I'm getting at least 1 to 2 emails every single week from one of our lender friends saying, are you ready? Do you have guarantee capacity? I've got this deal. I've got this processing plan. I've got this situation, and it could really benefit from a guarantee. So I have 16 active opportunities where I could place guarantees before the end of the year if we had the capacity, which is really just an exciting endorsement of how critical this tool would be for the lending community. So all to say, we're trying to raise as much as we can because the lending community has really expressed that much of a need. And keep in mind, Farm Credit offers 95% guarantees on millions of dollars of loans. So the capacity to make guarantees is really huge. And then another great part of the program is once a guarantee rolls off, there was no guarantee call, everything was fine, that capacity goes right back into our pool and we can make another guarantee with it. So putting those endowment assets to work really helps support this community again and again and again through this recycling pool opportunity.
Thank you, Lauren. Are there any questions around, because as Lauren was shared, the funded and the unfunded components, and it's just a very small amount of grant money that comes out of that 5% or 6%. I know some on the call might be already at 7% in payout and grant making. So, but that's a really interesting piece of this and creates potential selling point along the way as programming teams and investment teams working together within foundations. Any questions about that, the funded and the unfunded component that you would want broader clarity from Lauren on? Or is everybody okay? And the loan guarantee is only called upon default? Question mark.
Yes, that's right, Ellie. So a guarantor only has to step in and pay if there's a situation where the borrower was unable to pay. And with a pooled loan guarantee structure, the more guarantors that come into the pool, the less each individual guarantor's pro rata share of that call is. So if anything, it's a great reason to grab a friend, make a guarantor commitment, because the more that come in, the less everybody has to pay if and when there's a call. And again, our thorough, extensive relationships with these lenders has been a fabulous way to even just start learning about how do they view risk in their lending, how do they mitigate it, and what can we learn from that already so that we're placing our guarantees in a way where we're also thinking about risk. And again, our ultimate goal is to show USDA that making guarantees to this innovative lending space is no crazier or riskier than allowing the conventional ag banks to access them. So we're really trying to prove that the losses in this guarantee structure are very similar or less than what the FSA is already operating at. And we've done some FOIA data requests to figure out what are the USDA's losses in their lending program. 3 basis points was the answer. So not a lot of losses in the FSA loan guarantee program now. And we're really trying to track and mirror that as best as we can so that we can get these innovative lenders access to those taxpayer funded guarantees.
Super, thanks. So there's a question that came, Lauren and Zach. So okay, you know what? I'm gonna go with Dorothy's, and then because this is more are alternative lenders providing business assistance and workouts whenever possible to limit defaults? And then I want to go back to a data question that came in.
Yeah, it's a great question. It really is dependent on each individual lender, and our intention is not to change the way an innovative lender is already serving their borrowers in their community. We want to learn and understand it. So when we start engaging with a lender around making a guarantee, we essentially underwrite that lender. We want to understand their process, what's their policy on foreclosing on collateral to mitigate losses. And yes, many of them often look at restructuring modification before foreclosure. And the amount of technical assistance that some of these lenders provide is really, truly like next level in terms of how much they're willing to be a partner with that borrower and really help them succeed. So while it does depend, yes, what we've largely seen is that, again, these lenders aren't just here's your loan, call us if there's a problem. They want to be a partner in that operation, and they really want to see that borrower succeed.
Excellent.
And the loan guarantee is as much about accessing new capital as it is about mitigating the risk that really isn't there to start with. When we were given this presentation in New Mexico, Skya was there from Occupton, who's pioneered the interest-only loan for the last 10 years. And she shared that their loan loss rate, because of their relationship-based approach and their willingness to be flexible, was damn near zero. So we're just providing the guarantee so that folks can sell that to investors, not because the guarantee is needed, because when you do ag finance at terms that meet the needs of producers, you mitigate risk.
Yes, thank you so much, Zach. And again, that guarantee also opens up secondary market opportunities. And if we can take guaranteed loans and sell them to an institutional buyer and recycle that capital back into these innovative loan funds, not only does that mean they have more capacity to make more loans, it means that they can spend a little less time fundraising and trying to get more investment capital into their funds, and they can spend more of their time doing what they ought to be doing, which is really revolutionizing access to credit for producers and setting a new standard.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just managing the questions here. I want to go back to the data question, and then we got to and then want to come up to the kinds of projects that you're interested in guaranteeing. So let's look at this data question. What are your to both of you? What are your opinions about MRV companies and nonprofits looking to generate rich data sets on soil health? And Jen C. Singh was saying that the farmers aren't getting compensated for this, but how do you see this data factoring into underwriting? And if there's a question, JC, if I did not.
Yeah, I can explain what I mean. So I'm just thinking about the fact that what I'm observing is that we potentially do know how to measure, say, the health of a farm and maybe over time. And there are different opinions as to how often, we can or should do that. But and I think, for right now, I mean, farmers aren't really being compensated for healing their soils. But I was curious if there's a component to underwriting that includes maybe soil health data or like regenerative farm health data, at this stage, or because I see like a bunch of maybe MRV companies that are looking to sort of assess things like this, but I was curious if it is a consideration at this stage, or if you see it being a consideration later.
I'll start here. Maybe I've got an answer that can help probe a little further in the conversation. We see a lot of companies that are trying to measure and quantify that. One of the things that makes me hesitant is, again, like I mentioned before, if that data is only offered to the lenders for the purposes of underwriting, there's not necessarily an incentive for them to pass that savings on to the producer. And the further we get towards commoditizing those type of impacts, the more vulnerable we are to falling victim to that being used to exploit producers and hold them captive in a system. So this really has to come back to, and I'll say this until they're throwing dirt on me probably, we've got to make it economically viable for producers to be producing so that they have agency in this, so that they can tell that particular lender or that particular investor, no thanks, I'm going up the street here. So if we're giving that data to the producers and letting them use it to shop for better prices in their credit, then I'm all about it. But if it's these companies that are looking to sell carbon credits and bind producer to 40-year agreements when they've got 3-year debt, I just don't see the value in that for a producer.
Yes,
Yeah, it's helpful.
definitely echo everything Zach said there. I also think too, when metrics start getting involved, people tend to obsess about them, and we kind of lose the thread on regeneration being a holistic picture. And, you know, even for me in my mindset, regeneration is not just regenerating soil, it's regenerating rural economies, it's regenerating even the livelihood of agriculture. I mean, farmers are getting older and older every year, and we're seeing such little interest from young folks in getting into agriculture because the finances of it are so daunting and scary. So I totally agree with Zach. It really just depends how that data is used, who gets to wield it, who has access to it, who's expected to pay for it, and, you know, who could end up getting punished because of it. And again, that one set of data is valuable, but it's not the whole story.
Makes sense. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. So here, another question from Patty Chang, who is leads a CDFI that supports ecosystems in Hawaii. And actually, kudos to Hawaii, because there is quite an ecosystem with a really strong cultural root. She is interested in understanding what types of projects you're interested in guaranteeing.
Yeah, at this stage, we're really approaching it with a lot of curiosity. You know, we want to know, where are lenders seeing opportunities for guarantees? Where do they feel a guarantee would help that line get that deal across the line? And we know infrastructure is so critical. I think I saw Tim here from TIFS, who've been so outspoken on like, hey, everybody, we need infrastructure. It's such an important conversation. And we would love to put 50% of our guarantor capacity into infrastructure projects to get private capital off its assets and to invest in some of these really promising infrastructure deals. They can be a little bit trickier. There can be a lot more capital providers involved. And so we see a particularly ripe opportunity for guarantees to de-risk infrastructure so that the deal is more equitable for everybody and we get those critical pieces of supply chain existing so that regenerative producers have somewhere to sell what they're growing and buyers have somewhere to buy it from.
Yes, and Lauren, I have the good fortune of working with TIFs as well, and one of our team was over there in Hawaii just a few weeks back and is talking about going over again to help work in those spaces to help producers in Hawaii navigate through some of this to be able to better implement the regenerative practices we're all talking about. So absolutely, hats off to my colleagues at TIFs.
And Fawn, I know from Council of Coalition of Development Finance Agencies, you're on the call. I know you've done some work also in Hawaii.
Yeah, we were brought in a couple of years back on the main island when they had some volcano issues and coming in to do strategic finance planning to help them best utilize their funding to support all their community development, and then also have done some landscape mapping specifically around food and farm finance.
Linda Jo, I also want to flag, Fawn is developing also a food guarantee program that incentivizes local community banks to make loans to small scale food businesses. So just want to shout out for Fawn and CDFA also working on this equitable access to loan guarantees.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, Linda Jo, also for your ongoing support of us. But yeah, also see the amazing benefits of how a loan guarantee can really leverage dollars at the philanthropic level, state level, local level, and incentivize more mission-driven lenders to create dedicated food finance programs or open up their existing programming to more food and farm businesses.
Super. So I just want to ask, are there any more questions? I know Jeremy, anything that you want to add? I thank you for this, about, people have been sharing a number of resources, and Maggie, I just want to make sure that SAFSF, you're collecting all of these resources.
We got
and
them.
can make that information available to the participants.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
others that have registered. Okay, great. Any other additional questions before I got one mega question to ask of Lauren and Zach? You can either just open up or put your question in the chat, either or. So, okay. So here is my question for each of you. What is the one thing that's going to move the regenerative ag space and access to capital? The one thing, what would you say in response to that question?
I'll start and then pass it off to my colleague, Lauren. I think what's going to move this is if we all acknowledge, one, that all producers would do regenerative ag if they had the resources. Two, we're going to have to meet producers where they're at and give them the ability to do this from their own production income so that they've got something that they are able to control instead of being captive to something else. So that, those two things. And if we can come out of this conversation and go out there and get our arms around our neighbors that have to be in row crops right now because that's the financing they can get, or that are in the feedlot beef system because that's the financing they can get, and start to align our interests so that we're demanding a new capital system from top to bottom, that's the key to solving this and getting regenerative scaled.
Amen. Lauren?
Yeah, I think what's been top of mind for me as I've been talking to so many foundations, DAFs, family offices, high net worth folks about the guarantee program and what it's going to take more broadly to address this lack of access to capital to finance the transition to regenerative agriculture, is the fact that, we're asking producers to take bold action. We're asking them to do things differently, learn a new production system, potentially be ostracized by their neighbors, to really do something new and different and scary. And for many of them, we're asking them to farm differently than their family has for the last 5 generations. We're not making a small ask of men and women in agriculture and food production. And as I think about what FS6 could be doing, how can we really move the needle? What bold actions can we be taking? I think it's also incumbent upon funders and impact investors to say, what am I doing to be bold? How am I pushing myself? Where am I trying to access more innovation in how I approach my philanthropy? And I mean, the 5th C opportunity that Zach is offering is an incredible example of what innovative, bold capital really looks like. And I think sometimes we all get so focused on the wins. How do we make sure that we're moving towards a win, that we forget change and progress inherently requires losses? It requires figuring out what doesn't work. So we need to be less scared about what doesn't work and is this too bold, and really figure out that producers are adopting new practices and new markets, not having any clue what it's going to look like at the end of the season, and really just going with trust and belief that there's a different way to raise food that's better for people and the planet. So My call to action would be, how can we all match farmers in their bravery around trying to transition our food system and really take bold action? You're on mute, Linda Jo.
Amen. I mean, I'm already thinking strategy now. Got a lot of strategy internally to do here. So Zach and Lauren, extraordinary thank you. Extraordinary leaders in the field. I am going to send this back to Maggie. I wanted to also thank SFSF for hosting this. Maggie?
Yeah, thank you so much. What a fantastic conversation and calls to action. Sorry, I'm also managing the spotlight, so I'll remove the spotlight for everyone so you don't have to continue looking at it. Or Lauren, I don't know, I might not be able to move yours. Oh, great. Thank you to whoever did that. Um, yeah, this was a really, really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much to all of our attendees for putting fantastic questions in the chat. As Linda Jo referenced earlier, we've saved all of the resources that came through, and we will certainly be sharing those out along with the recording for today. So please be on the lookout for that. We are also hosting a gather round call tomorrow. So for anyone that is an SAFSF member, please join that call tomorrow. There will be an opportunity to continue today's conversation and continue that kind of moving into strategy piece that Linda Jo just referenced. So very much encourage you to do that. And then I will also just drop the link in the chat to check out any other upcoming SAFSF events. Wow, I did it too, and I work here. Along with the email for Holly if you're interested in learning more about SAFSF membership. But with that, I think we'll wrap up today and give everyone now 7 minutes back in their day. But just very, very grateful to you, Lauren and Zach, especially being on the road. Sorry about the spotlighting issues, but we had a great conversation. And thank you, of course, to you, Linda Jo, for fantastic moderating and questions. So yeah, with that, we'll wrap up for today, but we'll see you all on future calls. Thank you so much.